how do you actually develop a leadership pipeline for your ministry and for your church? Now, I get that some of you who just heard that say, leadership pipeline. I don't need a leadership pipeline. I don't need a pipeline. I need a water source. I need a couple of drips. I need enough volunteers to get into my ministry. And I will acknowledge that is a very true factor for many leaders and many churches. But here's what I know. When we are intentional about developing these kind of pipelines, when we do what I said earlier in the how to create an asking culture, that we teach this art of shoulder tapping, and we have volunteers who invite volunteers who invite volunteers. Well, eventually we will have leaders who raise up leaders who raise up leaders. And what I believe, if that verse in Ephesians that we use was true, is our role as pastors and leaders is to equip the saints for the work of the ministry, well, then our role as leaders is to raise up other leaders. And leaders are always going to raise up other leaders. So as we raise up leaders, those leaders are going to raise up leaders who are going to raise up leaders who are going to raise up leaders. And again, not just volunteers, but leaders. People who are, whether they have a title or not, whether they have a paycheck or not, they have figured out what it is that they are doing for the kingdom of God. So as leaders who raise up leaders, we've got to commit to the wise stewardship of the gifts of our people. But committing to the wise stewardship of our people's gifts means that we're asking a few questions. Are they passionate about what they're doing? Have we trained them in what they're doing? Are they fulfilled in what they're doing? Do they understand what they're doing? Are they satisfied in what they're doing? Are they on the verge of burnout? Are they underutilized? Is there something that they would want to do more of? Have we not given them the right opportunities to step up and to take on more responsibilities than they currently have? Listen, this is not about keeping them busy. This is not about the dump truck analogy that I gave you a little bit earlier, but this is about keeping them engaged, mentally and spiritually, emotionally involved in the things that they're doing. Are we committed to the wise stewardship of our people's spiritual gifts? But then we also have to define the opportunities for our people. And this is where a leadership pipeline is so important. If we don't have it clear in our head, then it's never going to be clear in the heads of the people that we lead. So as you're talking about a leadership pipeline, a very easy place to start with this is your own organizational chart. Maybe you have a staff team large enough that you have an org chart of who reports to whom and all of that. But in your volunteer teams, you should absolutely have that kind of org chart. I'll assume for the sake of this conversation, you're the leader of the ministry that you're a part of. Well, for you, as I said earlier in a different breakout, your span of care should be such that you care for a few people who care for a few people who care for a few people. And so just by beginning with that particular org chart, you can begin to get a good outline of what a leadership pipeline might look like for you. But I would caution you here to echo some of the things that have been said before in different breakouts. You want to be able to dream big. You want to start from the surplus and not the deficit. You want to have this blue sky thinking. You don't want to live in scorched earth mentality. You want to ask that question, if time and people and resources, if there were no limit on any of those things, what could my leadership pipeline look like in the middle of this? So you want to be able to define that clearly, lay that out visually, but then you want to be clear on the requirements of each level. There's a marketplace book called The Leadership Pipeline by Ram Sharayan and others. And they make the point in this book that not everybody who does and is a good doer is automatically a good delegator. I think it was in that book. They used the example of somebody who was a great used car salesman and broke all the sales records every single month. And then because they were doing such a good job and hitting all their quotas and then some, they were promoted to a sales manager where they promptly began to just shrivel up and die because they were a great salesman. They were not a great sales manager. And I think that's the way it is for a lot of our volunteers, many of our volunteers in our churches, that they're really good doers, but they're not really good delegators. And I think it's important for us to acknowledge that sometimes first-level servants need to remain first-level servants. That's not a knock against them. That's not a knock against how God has wired them. That's actually an affirmation of the gifts that they've been given. Some people want to be in the trenches. Some people want to be serving on the front lines, and they don't necessarily want to supervise other people that are serving on the front lines. That doesn't mean that they're JV-level Christians. That simply means that they're functioning out of the gifts that God has given them. Now, sure, we should give them those opportunities, as I said. We should give them the opportunity to step up if they want to, but we shouldn't consider it, they shouldn't consider it a demotion, and we shouldn't consider it an insult if they want to stay right where they are because they love exactly what they are doing. But I do want to give you a word of warning as we're talking about this idea of building a leadership pipeline. I think it's important for us, the leaders, to recognize that we must be very wary of the person who wants to hold a title before they're willing to hold a towel. Got to be wary of the person who wants to hold a title before they're hold a towel. I can't tell you the number of professional Christians that I have been unfortunately burned by over the years. People who come into our church with absolutely no resume or background or whatever, and not that any of those things are absolutely at all important. We've got people who come to our church all the time who've never been to church, who are become phenomenal Christ followers and volunteers and all of those things over the course of time. I'm talking about the people who come to us and say, here's my pedigree of all the things that I have done for the kingdom of God, and therefore I should be allowed to do that thing in this particular corner of the kingdom. Now, every once in a while that works. Most of the time, here's what's happening. They demand a title. They want a job, whether it's paid or unpaid, doesn't really matter. And then they begin to effectively burn down everything around them because they haven't taken the time to get to know our DNA and our culture and our people. They're just there to promote all the good and all the knowledge that they have. Contrast that with the story of a dear friend of mine named Chuck. I first met Chuck, or first observed Chuck, a few years ago on a Sunday morning. I was walking through our lobby and I saw this guy down on his hands and knees in front of the front glass door of our lobby, and he had a bottle of Windex and a roll of paper towels, and he was wiping down the glass. And the guy that I was walking with, I said, "Who's that? I've never seen him." And said, "Oh, that's Chuck. He's brand new. He started coming to the church a few weeks ago, wanted to serve. We told him to come and show up, be a part of the setup team, and he's washing windows." I got to know Chuck. Chuck and I started meeting for different things, and we'd grab coffee every once in a while or whatever. And I found out Chuck actually had ministry experience and felt a call to ministry. Well, fast forward, Chuck eventually came on our staff, was sent out from our church to plant a church, and now Chuck is the lead pastor of a church here in our own city, leading a congregation. But we didn't find those things out about Chuck because he told us how good he was and how smart he was. We found those things out about Chuck because he was willing to hold a towel before he asked to hold a title. And we were the ones who said, "Chuck, you should consider more." And then we realized just how much more capable he was. But it wasn't because he told us. It was because, well, maybe the Spirit showed us in the middle of that. So you want to be wary of that. But as you're building your leadership pipeline, let's move back to the positive. I want to ask you the question and encourage you to ask the question, as you're building a pipeline, as you're thinking about how to equip different people, one of the things that you might discover is that it is time for you to build out some processes and build out some learning opportunities where people would have the chance to sit and learn around certain topics, maybe develop certain skills. You might call that a gathering. You could call it maybe a small group. You could call it a cohort. You could call it whatever it is that you want to call it. But I would encourage you, as you're thinking about a pipeline, and we're talking about the requirements for each level in those pipelines, how then do you decide who you want to be a part of moving from one level to the next? Because what's required for lower level volunteer is going to be different than what's required from a volunteer supervisor or from a service leader or from a ministry leader or from a staff member. And so as you're moving up each one of those levels, there's going to be different things that are required of each one of those levels. And one of the ways that we have found that is effective in determining how we equip people is we actually build out these environments where people can come to learn more. But you've got to ask the question before you go down that road, who is it that should be around the table? I'll tell you, for us, we've done this before where it's been multiple ministry disciplines. People could be involved in, they're already a deacon, or they're involved in kids, or they're part of the worship team, or they're in guest services or whatever. And we're bringing them together not to necessarily teach them about something in a particular ministry area, but to teach them about different leadership skills and how to develop other leaders. Maybe for you, it's not even a group that you're bringing together, but it's books that you're offering or podcasts that you're having them listen to or whatever it is. But you need to ask, who are the people that are going to benefit from this? But secondly, and related to that, what information is it that you are trying to convey? Again, I personally have done this in different ways over the years. In one season of ministry, I was bringing together a group of men for about a semester at a time, and we were going through very specific books that were designed to help them decide the kind of leader God might be calling them to be. For some of them, they were going to go into more of a deacon serving area of service. For others, they might be going into more of an elder pipeline. For some, they were going to remain in their volunteer team, but they were going to step up and take a greater role in that. But the goal of this gathering was just to bring men together to figure out, number one, a little bit more about them. Number two, where it is that they wanted to grow. Number three, where they wanted to go. Number four, how could we specifically help them get there? Some of the resources that we selected were specifically designed to help take them down that journey. You've got to answer that question. What information is it that you are trying to convey? Is it information that is very specific to a particular team, kids, worship, deacon ministry, whatever it is? Is it that leadership in general? What information are you trying to convey? But then maybe one of the most important questions, maybe one of the most often overlooked questions by us as leaders, but one of the questions that some of your people are absolutely going to ask, and that is this: what transformation are you seeking? In other words, what will they do with what they now know? What will they do with what they now know? We realized this several years ago in a different kind of gathering that I'll tell you actually more about here in a moment, where we had people that we were asking a lot of. We were asking them to show up really early. We were asking them to read a lot of books. We were asking them to commit to a lot of discussions. And at some point, somebody that we were trying to invite into this environment said, "That's great. When I'm done with this in 8 months, what's going to be different about me?" And I realized that we had not actually answered the transformation question for them. So it helped us to begin to answer that question. At the end of our journey together, we're going to be together, in this case, January through August. On August, the end of August, what is it then that you're going to be able to do with what you know? What will your ministry look like then? What will your life look like then? What will your family look like then? What will your work life, your marketplace life look like then? What will you do with what you know? Now, I want to stop here. Maybe you don't have a leadership pipeline at all, and you need to take a few minutes to sketch out that org chart and begin to put the bare bones down of what a leadership pipeline might look like for you and your congregation. Maybe you already have a leadership pipeline, but you haven't defined the needs for each level and the requirements to get to each level.